The smell of rotting leaves permeated the fresh, early autumn air, an ironic accompaniment to the horror that had lately passed. Overnight, the calm in a small, quiet suburban neighborhood had changed to become tense. It all started with the discovery of a young woman's body, buried in the deep forest behind her house, by a team running ground-penetrating radar. Layla Boswell, the victim, was a brilliant and well-liked university student with a bright future in marine biology, noted for her vivacious attitude. Her friends' and family's life had been left in great emptiness after her vanished, but the horrific discovery tore apart the fragile layer of hope they had been clinging to. Respected high school science teacher Layla's father, Alan Boswell, was well known for his exacting sense of justice and methodical approach to living. A cold dread crept into his stomach as he watched the frenzy of forensic activity from near the police tape. Usually a scene of calm walks and young discovery, the forest floor was now a crime scene, humming with detectives. Though his mind ran with questions and worries, Alan was resolved to see the truth revealed. Assigned to spearhead the inquiry was seasoned investigator Detective Mira Santos, known for cracking the toughest problems. As she looked about, her keen eyes missed nothing. She noted Layla's body's position and the disturbed ground. She suspected the crime had been painstakingly planned and carried out, since there were no clear indicators of trauma or conflict. Layla's last known actions dominated the first phase of the inquiry. Late one evening, she had been seen leaving a neighborhood cafe. Those who had seen her described her as happy and enthusiastic. CCTV footage from surrounding businesses showed her strolling alone, apparently unconcerned about any threat. Her friends said she had been organizing a surprise for her quiet, reflective young man, computer engineering boyfriend, Rami Shakir. Layla's disappearance had crushed Rami, and now the terrible news of her death devastated him. Though he was grieving, Alan Boswell couldn't get rid of a gnawing sense of something being quite wrong. Starting his own quiet search, he sived over Layla's possessions and questioned her friends. His exacting nature brought him to a vital piece of evidence: Layla's notebook. Among the pages of daily reflections and scientific data, he came upon notes on her relationship with Rami. They first presented a picture of young love and shared dreams, but more recent entries suggested increasing anxiety and fear. Layla had written about Rami's progressively erratic behavior, his inexplicable absences, and the sense of observation. Detective Santos, meantime, dug into Rami's past. He seemed on first glance to be a model student, committed to his studies and utterly in love with Layla. But closer examination of his life turned up a darker side. Rami had a history of explosive relationships, and friends' and classmates' interviews revealed he was possessive and prone to great jealousy. Digital forensics found hidden social media accounts where he had posted upsetting messages about Layla, expressing both his love and his mounting mistrust. Alan's discovery of a secret folder on Layla's laptop, labeled innocuously as research, marked the turning point in the inquiry. Inside were screenshots of text exchanges, pictures of inexplicable bruises on her arms, and a letter directed to him. Layla expressed in the letter her worries about Rami monitoring her, following her movements, and growingly dictatorial behavior. She was afraid of his response, even though she had intended to call it quits. Equipped with this fresh data, Alan brought his results to Detective Santos. The elements of the jigsaw started to fit together. Digital evidence, journal entries, and Rami's actions all led to him as the main suspect. Still, the evidence was circumstantial. More specific evidence would help them to create a strong case against him. The discovery came when forensic entomology found Layla's death date, exactly matching one of Rami's unexplainable absences. Additional review of his phone records and GPS data revealed that Layla vanished from near the woods late at night. Detective Santos got a warrant to look over Rami's apartment using this damning proof. Inside Layla's personal belongings, relics of his obsession, and most damning of all, a blood-stained shirt buried in his wardrobe. Rami Shakir was quickly arrested and handled precisely. The front of a bereaved boyfriend fell apart as he was taken into custody, exposing a young man caught in a web of his own making. Once all united in hope for Layla's safe return, the community struggled with the terrible reality of her murder at the hands of someone she had trusted. The knowledge that her killer had been so close compounded Alan Boswell's suffering at losing his daughter. Still, there was a glimmer of resolution among the grief. The truth was out, but at last, justice was within reach. Slow and sometimes terrible, the road to the courtroom promised to be full of revelations and heartache. The inquiry had only just started to untangle the whole scope of the disaster. Under the austere view of the judge, truth and dishonesty collided on a sterile battlefield in the courtroom. Once a dear friend in Layla's life, Rami Shakir now sat in the defendant's chair, his face a mask of stoic detachment. The weight of the evidence against him was great, but he exuded calm that unsettled those visiting the trial. Alan Boswell sat in front row, hands tightly together, eyes fixed on the events. Knowing that the fight for justice was just as much Detective Santos's as it was his own, his heart hurt with a mix of loss and will. Under the strong direction of attorney Jenna Patel, the prosecution started their case with a thorough chronology of events carefully assembled from the data Alan and the detectives had collected. Detective Santos was the first witness scheduled to stand. Her exact and clear account of the series of events leading to Rami's arrest set out. She went over the ground-penetrating radar search, forensic entomology findings, and damning evidence discovered in Rami's apartment, as she depicted a young man driven by obsession and jealousy, whose facade of normalcy concealed a sinister reality. The jury listened carefully. Layla's closest friends then stepped forward, their voices shaking as they related their notes of Rami's progressively erratic behavior. They talked of his possessiveness, his regular monitoring of Layla, and the terrifying threats he had issued under the cover of concern. Every testimonial added still another layer to the prosecution's case, presenting Rami as a dangerous and controlling person. But Layla's notebook turned out to offer the most convincing proof. From its pages, Attorney Patel read aloud to expose Layla's emotional suffering and worries. The entries were heartbreaking, every word evidence of a young woman's struggle to flee the grip of a relationship that had become poisonous. The courtroom was still, her words hanging thick in the air. Led by the sharp and relentless attorney Victor Chung, Rami's defense team aimed to destroy the prosecution's case. They contended that the evidence was circumstantial and that the emotional character of the crime distorted the way the prosecution presented Rami. They cited his perfect academic record, lack of a past criminal record, and allegedly inconsistent friend testimony. In an effort to discredit Rami, Chung asked a number of character witnesses, professors, friends, and family members, who said he was a committed student and a loving boyfriend. They portrayed a young man whose unfounded charges had unfairly damaged his future. Underneath their words, though, was a sense of unease, a feeling they too battled to balance the Rami they knew with the Rami under trial. The defense's plan came to a turning point when they brought Rami to the podium. His manner was cool, his responses measured. He talked of his love for Layla, his shock at her death, and his confusion at being charged with her murder. His performance was riveting, casting doubt on the story of the prosecution. He presented himself as a victim of circumstance, a young man whose sole transgression was loving too intensely. But the prosecution had one last piece of evidence that tore apart Rami's well-manicured front. They presented the outcome of a psychological assessment carried out following his detention. The assessment turned up ingrained problems with control and possessiveness, which had been exacerbated in Layla's relationship. It created a terrifying picture of a young man driven to murder by his obsession. The courtroom in the last days of the trial was a boiling furnace of conflict. The jury considered for hours, their choice bearing weight on the obligation of justice. Alan Boswell sat in silent prayer, memories of Layla's laughter, her dreams, and the future she would never see consuming him. The jury's decision, guilty of first-degree murder, echoed through the quiet courtroom when they returned at last. The onlookers gasped collectively. Then there was a tsunami of emotional release. Though the ache of his loss never goes away, Alan felt a great weight come off his shoulders. Next came Rami's sentencing hearing. With austere tones, the judge sentenced someone to life without parole's possibility. Rami's mask of calm broke as he was being taken away to show the actual degree of his anxiety and hopelessness. The trial had revealed his darkest recesses, and now justice had been done. To Alan Boswell, the end of the trial signaled the start of a new chapter. The truth had been discovered, and although it offered some closure, it did not help to lessen the suffering of losing Layla. Once split by the tragedy, the community started to heal. They remembered Layla as a vivid and passionate person, not for the way her life came to finish. For their part in bringing Rami to justice, Detective Santos and Attorney Patel got honors. Their work is evidence of the strength of tenacity and the search of truth. Finding comfort in his work schedule and the encouragement of his colleagues, Alan went back to teaching. Layla's memory stayed a lighthouse, motivating him to live with the same bravery and fortitude she had shown in her last days. Though it left lasting effects on all those engaged, the trial also created bonds of strength and solidarity. Against unfathomable loss, they had found the truth and made sure Layla's voice was heard. And in that, they discovered a degree of calm. The life sentence of Rami Shakir echoed across the community's hallways, a sobering reminder of the frailty of trust and the sinister shadows that might lurk inside apparently ordinary lives. The aftermath of Layla's murder left many searching for explanations, struggling with the hows and whys that defined Rami's slide into darkness, even as the trial came to finish. Detective Santos felt an irresistible need to know what had driven Rami down such a road, even if she had closed the case. With an eye toward finding aspects not thoroughly investigated during the trial, she started a more thorough research on his background. Her findings presented a complicated and sad picture of a young man whose psychological conflict had been long in development. Rami had experienced turbulence in his early years. Often absent, working several jobs to make ends meet, were his parents, immigrants who had battled to establish a life in a new nation. Rami had been entrusted to a succession of apathetic relatives and untrustworthy nanny. His academic successes were his escape, the one place he felt he had control and approval. His later obsessive behaviors were set up by early lack of emotional support and continuous need to prove his value. Detective Santos found a pattern of behavior that had gone unseen or unaddressed as she combed through old-school records and psychological assessments. Rami had always been a loner, sharply focused on his studies but cut off from his peers. Teachers had observed his genius, but also his trouble creating social contacts. He had a history of fleeting, intense friendships that frequently ended suddenly, isolating him every time. Santos found the breakthrough when he spoke with psychologist Dr. Eliana Garrison, who had seen Rami just during his high school years. Particularly in personal relationships, Dr. Garrison had observed his strong-seeming fear of abandonment and his inclination for obsessive thoughts. She had advised therapy, but Rami's parents had never followed through, occupied with their own problems. Santos linked the dots, and discovered Layla had become the center of all Rami's unspoken problems. Like any young romance, theirs began with promise and love. But Layla developed and pursued her own interests. Rami's anxiety of losing her had become a compulsive obsession. Driven by the concern that she would leave him like everyone else in his life, his love had turned into something dark and possessive. The community also battled to match the Rami they believed they knew with the killer revealed in court. Shocked by the knowledge that someone they had considered as a quiet, conscientious student had harbored such darkness, his former teachers and classmates struggled with friends, and relatives of Layla wanted to honor her for who she was, not as a victim defined by her terrible death. Scholarships and memorials in her name were set up to guarantee that her legacy would endure through the chances given to others. Following the trial, Alan Boswell discovered he was drawn to volunteer work, especially with young people at risk. He thought maybe the tragedy might have been avoided if someone had contacted Rami earlier and given him the help he so sorely needed. Speaking at neighborhood centers and local colleges, he shared Layla's story not only as a warning, but also as a call to action for increased mental health awareness and in support. As he thought about the matter, Attorney Patel also started to support reform. In an effort to spot and help young people before their problems grew more severe, she advocated improved integration of psychological assessments into the school system. Her efforts resulted in fresh policies and initiatives meant to help and intervene for students showing extreme emotional pain. Now serving his life sentence, Rami was a very sad and regretful man. He confronted his actions in the solitude of his cell. Although it came too late to stop the damage he had done, therapy was provided. His letters to Layla's parents, full of apologies and explanations, never arrived. His guilt echoed in the quiet of his imprisonment. Years went by, and the little suburban town devastated by Layla Boswell's terrible murder discovered fresh relevance. The community was woven with the memory of the vivid young woman with so much potential, which became a catalyst for change and inspiration. Once a bereaved parent broken by loss, Alan Boswell had become for many a lighthouse of hope, both locally and nationally. His work with at-risk young people and support of mental health awareness became highly regarded initiatives. Many people related to Alan's story, and his relentless commitment to stop such tragedies transformed his suffering into a great tool for good. Established in her memory, the Layla Boswell Foundation turned into pillar of the community's activities. The foundation funded mental health initiatives in colleges, as well as scholarships for students studying marine biology, Layla's chosen field. Every year, the foundation held seminars and activities emphasizing early intervention, mental health, and the value of support systems for young people. Drawing from his own experience to underline the need of awareness and compassion, Alan's talks at these events were always sincere. Having closed one of the most difficult cases of her career, Detective Mira Santos underwent permanent transformation from the experience. The Boswell case strengthened her conviction about the need of careful, sympathetic inquiry. Santos kept working with fresh enthusiasm, guiding younger detectives and pushing for better instruction in handling emotionally difficult situations. She also stayed in close proximity to Alan, since their common experience bonded them in respect and understanding. The career of attorney Jenna Patel also prospered. Her participation in the well-publicized case brought her recognition, but her later work on legal reform really defined her legacy. Patel put in great effort to draft laws mandating required mental health screenings and school support systems. Her efforts paid off since thorough mental health initiatives were launched all around the state, with an eye toward preventing tragedies like Layla's from ever happening once more. These programs gave students access to counselors instructional materials, and safe environments to share their challenges. Though sad, Rami Shakir's story was a sobering reminder of the results of untreated mental illness and the perils of unresolved emotional trauma. Rami started intensive therapy in prison. The sessions gave some understanding of his troubled mind and the elements that had led him to such a dark place, even though they came too late to stop his horrific activities. His narrative was included into Layla Boswell Foundation-developed instructional materials and initiatives meant to highlight the crucial need of early mental health intervention and support. Driven by a shared goal, to remember Layla not as a victim, but as a catalyst for good, the community that had once been split by mistrust and anxiety gradually healed. She was honored with memorials, and the nearby university called a marine biology research center after her. Attracting students and researchers eager to carry on Layla had so fervently sought, this center developed into a hub for creativity and discovery. One especially moving moment occurred during the Layla Boswell Marine Research Center's dedication event. Standing before friends, supporters, and students, Alan Boswell discussed the dreams of his daughter and the ongoing influence of her legacy. Though tinged with grief, his voice was strong and clear as he related tales of Layla's love of the sea and her unrelenting global curiosity. Driven by his words, the audience could sense Layla's presence in the room, her spirit alive in the work done in her name. Though the healing process was protracted and difficult, it was dotted with times of great connection and personal development. The community learned to rely on one another, to spot indicators of trouble in their friends and relatives, and to provide non-judgmentally supportive help. Regular mental health check-ins were instituted by schools to make sure students had the tools they required to negotiate adolescent challenges. Over time, the narrative of Layla Boswell and Rami Shakir evolved from a warning story to a monument to the strength of the human will and the need of compassion. Many others were motivated to support mental health projects, guarantee that no one else would suffer in silence, and act from loss to advocacy by Alan Boswell. Layla left behind hope and change as much as tragedy. Though short, her life set off a movement that improved many, many more people. Once defined by its grief, the community came out stronger, more linked, and more resolved to build a world in which everyone's mental health took front stage. And in that, Layla's light stayed brilliantly guiding others toward a future full of love, compassion, and understanding.